In this final part of my trilogy with consultant cardiologist and electrophysiologist Dr Boon Lim, we talk about the importance of HRV, or heart rate variability, in managing long COVID. What is it? Why is it so important? And how can we manipulate it to most effectively improve our symptoms? Let's dive in. So obviously, drugs can help manage a bunch of the physiological stuff that governs blood pressure and heart rates. One of the sort of topics around, which we haven't really discussed at too much length yet, is HRV. And a lot of long haulers have become aware of HRV in a way that they weren't previously. And the general observation is that HRV is surprisingly low amongst long haulers. And we feel better when we can do things that raise that HRV. I know I certainly do. And I know that, when I go and try and do my parasympathetic stimulation, the goal is to essentially increase that HRV. Different ways of measuring it, of course, depending on what device you have, whether it's an Oura Ring or a Garmin watch or anything else. But I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how you use HRV in your practice, and what you see the role of measuring it to be, and how being aware of it can help long haulers.
It's a very good series of questions. I'm just going to show your audience what's called a inner balance tool. This is made by Heart Math. There's a link on the website Stop Fainting called Breathe Yourself Better, where I demonstrate this over a 45-minute video about how breathing patterns can shift your HRV. I've just put it on my ear, clipped it on my collar, as you can see, like this. And I'm going to start recording a HRV pattern. And whilst I'm recording, I'm going to share my screen, Jazz, and actually continue talking so that people can see what a lousy HRV looks like, okay? Yeah. Because when you're speaking or when you engage in any kind of activity that takes away your breath, it's quite difficult to have a good cadence. So just let me get to my screen, and I'm going to share my screen. And when I start the broadcast, you'll be able to see the inputs into the HRV, the actual platform, which is the inner balance platform in HRV. So I'm starting to share. And what I'm really going to illustrate to answer your question is there is a mandala that you can see. And the mandala goes big and small. And as you go big and small, I've just set this counter to 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. So another way of looking at this more with very clear example of what's happening to your heart rate is actually looking at this top line that is going to the left and the right. And I'm following the breath in, going up, and following the breath out, going down. So anyone watching this now, whilst watching, can already start to breathe in this pattern. I'm not breathing in this pattern because I'm talking. But what you can see at the bottom, which is the blue line, which is going up and down, is actually my heart rate. So as I'm speaking now, it's picking up my heart rate. And right now it's 85, going up to 90, coming back down. And then at the bottom where you see three colors, red, blue, green, is actually my coherence score. And anything above 1 is pretty good. Anything above 4 is very good. So to be in a coherent state means you're expressing respiratory sinus arrhythmia, and you're actually becoming very, very autonomically centered, where you're balancing the sympathetic and parasympathetic state. And breathing in this pattern can be quite calming. So Jess, you already said that sometimes you just take a 2-minute reset, put on alpha stim and breathe, and you feel a switch in your system. Now, instead of feeling it, Jazz, what I'm going to try and do is show you a switch. Now, if this guy can perform, I'm going to try, okay? So I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop talking very shortly, and I'm going to breathe in.
Okay, so just so that we're not holding silence here, I'll let Boon do his breathing. And what we're essentially looking for here is we're expecting to see the white line that's in the bottom left pair of boxes. We're hoping that that white line should start to increase. Maybe Boon can just nod at me if I'm correct here. And it should go from the red zone towards the blue zone, and maybe up towards the top towards the green. Meanwhile, what I'm also noticing straight away is that the heart rate line has become much smoother
since he stopped talking. It's now a very sort of smooth sine wave, if you like. And whilst the actual BPM hasn't necessarily dropped hugely, the shape of what's going on in terms of that heart rate has changed a lot. And maybe, I don't know if that's just the nature of the way it's recorded, but maybe Boon, when he's finished, can talk about that too. Now, look what's happened straight away to that HRV line. He's gone flying straight up into the green zone. That's remarkably fast. I wasn't expecting it to work that fast. And this is simply through concentrating on the coherence breathing. And coherence breathing is generally understood to be 5 seconds breathing in through the nose, 5 seconds breathing out through the mouth. And again, trying to focus on filling the belly with air as opposed to your upper chest. And you can see how that green zone at the top of the chart now has actually expanded, because he's expanding it at the top level up towards 6.2 now. I don't know how far and how high he can go here. It's like some sort of like Olympic diver. But yes, I mean, this is actually really remarkable to see just how dramatic the results can be from breathing alone. And if ever there was a doubt that breath work seems like, well, I breathe all the time, what's breath work? I don't understand what that means. How can it have a physiological impact? Here you go, right? There is a
okay, so
clear
it's great
demonstration. Yeah.
So amazing overrunning commentary, because you got it exactly right, Jazz. And shifting to this state took me 3 minutes, I think, or maybe a minute and a half.
Yeah.
And this is something you're doing as well. Now, when I did that, as you were talking, even with the barrage of your narration and looking at this thing and trying to be a performing monkey, I was feeling calm. And that is the predominant feeling I have when I breathe in this way. And actually, Navy SEALs, before they engage in a fight or a battle, are taught to do box breathing. And it's a very similar concept with 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. And it's a very similar pattern to just steady your sympathetic and really have some parasympathetic control. And you can see how quickly I also fall back into this lousy pattern with a low coherence once I stop the breath work, right? But I'm still feeling calm. So this is a very sensitive way to really recognize when you're coherent. And actually, within 2 minutes, if you have this on, and when I first got this gadget, I was using it all the time because it was something that you could use as a biofeedback tool to recognize when you were in the zone, when you were in a coherent place with good level of HRV. But after a while, and I'm going to say that you are likely not to need this, Jess. I mean, unless you want to play with it academically, but somebody like you who is a breather, who has practiced breathing, probably does not need to use this biofeedback tool. You can already feel it. You feel it in how your body speaks to you when you're breathing in this way. And I know it's a sixth sense. You know, your autonomic balance or coherence state is a sixth sense. But when you practice, you can switch into this mode and know you're there. And this is my kind of very strong feeling about HRV, which is, it is a very useful thing to just know about. And I hope that the illustration here is simple enough that most people can understand what HRV is. And the ability to get in there quite quickly with just 60 to 90 seconds of pacing your breath is, as you say, quite remarkable. And the ability to shift into this very positive state of coherence is also very, very impressive. And actually is exactly what you said at the start that you were doing. Because in between these recordings, we've had to stop and start again. And for the audience who don't know, Jess then did a 2-minute breath work exercise and got himself into a much better state of coherence and autonomic stability. So the role of HRV tracking, I think, is challenging. As you can see here on the trace, if you're tracking HRV continuously and you are in the day-to-day thrall of life and just engaging with normal life activities, it might not mean that much. But when HRV tracking comes into its own is during sleep. And actually during sleep, your natural winding down of thoughts and expectations switch you into a very baseline HRV mode. And that's what things like your Apple Watch or Aura tracker will be able to give you. Now, in time, your HRV at night will be influenced by many practices of conscious, coherent breathing in the daytime. And I would start with something like 10 minutes, 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, before you sleep. And as I said, couple this with a very positive emotion, and the combination of an emotional feeling that switches you into Vegas plus the breath work is what can get my score sometimes up to 10. But if I'm just doing breath, I somehow don't get there. So there's an additional kind of subtle component, Jess, which no one really talks about. But beyond breath, there's something else that gets you even more coherent, which is a feeling.
Yeah. And this is where we start to get into the very controversial subjects of things like, you know, the Gupta program and lightning process and things like this. And a lot of those, they use NLP, and there's a lot of visualization that goes along with breathing exercises. And actually, there's been a lot of criticism that's aimed at that because it falls under some people's banner of, inverted commas, thinking yourself better. But the reality is in these shades of grey between thinking yourself better at one end and taking like some hard drugs at the other. In the middle there is this space where we can do things with our mind and body that affect us physiologically, especially when it comes to the autonomic system, which we know is a huge part of the puzzle for most people's long COVID symptoms. And I think this is why I've been banging on the drum about breath work for 2 years now. And I think something like what you've just demonstrated here is really powerful, because it's not just this idea of, oh, just do some breathing, I breathe anyway. We can see the physiological changes measured here as you're doing it. And given that we know that sympathetic overdrive is a thing, here is probably one of the most effective tools that we have that's completely free, and you can do it whenever you like, which will manage your condition surprisingly effectively. I mean, I don't know if you've had feedback or how aware of this your patients, your long COVID patients, have been when they've come to you, Boon. Is this something that they're all sort of already aware of, or are people not aware of it, and then you help them do it, and then they notice a big change? What's been your experience there?
I think 30% of patients have already self-selected an educational program or looked at your videos or, Google stuff and found the Gupta program. And so there is an awareness of these processes, but actually seeing it live in action is really powerful. Seeing the HRV occur and the changes in the coherence breathing occur immediately can be extremely powerful for patients to kind of acknowledge that there is something that they can do within 3 to 5 minutes to immediately switch their autonomic nervous system to a different state, a more healing vagal state. So I think the awareness is there. The trouble I find is that maybe 60 or 70% of patients that come into my clinic, I literally stand up and I show them what a breath is like and a belly breath should be. So the simplest way to demonstrate is one hand on your chest, one hand on your navel. And on the breath in, balloon in the abdomen coming out. And on the breath out, navel touching spine, okay? So I'll show you what most of my patients do when they come into my clinic. They're breathing like this. This is a paradoxical breathing pattern where we get a chest expansion through the thoracic muscles. The rib cage are all needing to expand your lungs. The other way of breathing, which is the belly breath, is and here I am taking a fairly deep breath. Out, belly touching the spine, okay? So there are many ways you can feel this. You can also feel this by putting your hands on your chest and feeling the abdomen rise. When you breathe in, the abdomen rises. When you breathe out, the abdomen comes down. And if you're not feeling this through that simple exercise, then actually you need to just not beat yourself up over it, just very gently bring yourself and focus your attention back on the breath. So just focus on expanding the diaphragm. So your diaphragm is this muscle that sits underneath your thorax, in between the thorax and the abdomen, that when you breathe in, it pulls down. So it expands those lungs because it's pulling the thoracic cavity down, and it's creating more volume. And that is the proper way that you should be breathing for maximal kind of lung expansion, but also vagal activation. And that's the way we lose our breath when we become very sympathetically driven. So as you said, people always say, I've been breathing throughout my life. Why are you telling me about breath? There are so many specific breath techniques that can be extremely helpful. And that's why things like yoga, and actually the English National Opera Breathe program, or singers in particular, or choir members, are very good at their diaphragm breath. So when they come into my clinic, they immediately have that diaphragm breath. And it's very nice to see, because that's the way they've been trained to breathe and express their kind of sound. So I think breath is fundamental. I think there's another question, which is when you are thwarted by this resonating frequencies in your heart rate, blood pressure, particularly if your blood pressure is low, it's very difficult to then, in my mind, as a sole treatment, breathe yourself to wellness. It doesn't work like that. And as you said, you need to take the best of every single facet that's available to you to come together and develop the treatment program that you need. So I would urge, seeing as this is focused on autonomic dysfunction, which is my bag, I would urge you to really have an upper arm cuff blood pressure. And so you can check it whilst you're standing, stand for 7 minutes. And if you're getting symptomatic while standing and better whilst lying down, and your pressure is low, have more fluid, more salt, more compression, do the isometric exercise, and try and get your blood pressure, at least your blood volume status, better. All the while coupling that in almost a parallel stream with what is considered autonomic retraining by breathing and by feeling positive emotions, the easiest of which I would say is gratitude. And I think the combination of that will be quite helpful for patients with this syndrome of autonomic dysfunction in long COVID. And as I say, the caveat is not everyone has this. And if your symptoms are not changed whatsoever by sitting, standing, or lying, then it may be you don't have such fluctuations. But if you do have the symptoms, I strongly suspect you might have an element of autonomic dysfunction.
So, obviously you've seen this sort of autonomic dysfunction after EBV in the past. EBV tends to resolve by itself, and post-viral fatigue, glandular fever tends to resolve after 12 months or so. What do you see as the prognosis for long COVID and dysautonomia in long COVID? And I was wondering if you could just speak to anything specifically around the fact that dysautonomia isn't necessarily something that's going to be with you forever now. It can be improved. How are your patients doing generally, and what do you see as the prognosis for this?
So I would say 95% of my patients are improved within 6 months, and maybe 70% or 60 to 70% are improved to the extent they can get back to part-time work, substantial, maybe 70 to 80% of their part-time work. And at a year, maybe that 60 or 70% are back to full-time work. So I'm often very humbled by the fact that, patients who recover have taken a lot of the stepwise management into their own hands, particularly the conservative strategies that we talked about. And that leaves us to talk about the 30 or 40% who actually are or find it quite difficult to make further progress, right, despite everything that's thrown at them. And I think that the features there with respect specifically to autonomic dysfunction is, as you said, there is a lot of waxing and waning of symptoms when you get to this cohort of patients. Because those who continue to do unwell, they actually don't come back to see me until they're flawed by the next wave of symptoms, having had a relatively good time or a reasonably good time with their health for 2 or 3 months, and then something happens. So there is this constant threat of a re-triggering of the symptoms. But by and large, nearly everyone makes an improvement and then have this downward triggers that really the second time round sends the kind of psychological state into a much darker place, Jess, because you feel you're recovering. And then when you step back again after trying to achieve more and more in life, getting back to work and getting a sense of normality, to then have that setback again is a very, very negative experience, much more so than the first time. And I think this calls for some of the more, if you like, holistic approaches, such as work support, social support, family support, prolonged self-support or understanding and kindness to self, and staying the course, right, in your mind, knowing that actually things have improved before, they will improve again, and finding that narration of expectation of recovery and hope being very positive rather than the opposite narrative, which is, damn it, I've gone down again and I won't come up again and I'll keep coming down in life. So this is quite a fine balance, and I have to be careful with what I say exactly, because if everyone is throwing everything at the problem, including drugs and fluid and salt, and they're still falling off a cliff sometimes the falling off a cliff is what happens when you pick up COVID again, or when you pick up an intercurrent infection, or when you go on a holiday and it's too hot in the sun and you've had a few more alcohol drinks than you should have. But life's there also for the taking, for enjoying. So don't be so hard on yourself is my point. And actually, things will regulate again. We live in this sinusoidal pattern, and just as you are down, there will be an up.
If you won the lottery tomorrow and the condition was that you had to put the winnings into your dream research project, do you have an idea about what that dream research project would be?
I'd like to solve the problem of the blind man and the elephant. And for those who don't know, the 6 blind men of Hindustan.
I don't know this. I don't know this reference, so you might have to enlighten me.
Yeah. So John Godfrey Sachs, I mean, you can Google it and put a reference. I'll give you a link. You should put a reference. It's a beautifully written poem. The 6 blind men of Hindustan, to learning they were much inclined, chance upon an elephant, and the elephant was touched and felt in very different places. So the one who put the hand on the side of the elephant described the elephant like a wall, and the one who grabbed the tail of the elephant described the elephant like a rope, and the one who felt the tusk described the elephant as a spear. Now, are they all right? Or are they all wrong? Or are they all both right and wrong? And
I see where you're going with this.
In the eyes of the beholder. So the answer to the $1 million research question is that we need to come away from our silos, because both as consultants, as physicians, we need to understand that the body is a whole, and not only for long COVID, to be honest, for every condition that there is out there. We are sometimes so driven down the nth degree of iteration and kind of molecular characterization, which are important definitely for some diseases, but we sometimes lose the bigger picture. And the 6 blind men of Hindustan really tell us that there's a bigger picture, both for the physicians, which is an educational component, which will be subject, I think, to a lot of resistance, because we all subspecialize, me included. And I don't even do cardiology. I do electrophysiology and syncope. So I wouldn't know how to blow up a stent in somebody's arteries, right? And that's how subspecialist I am. So in hematology, for example, there's somebody who will only do white cells and don't want to touch red cells. And that's how subspecialists we are. We need to now see the pathology of the patient as a more holistic approach, so we can understand that sometimes the facets are linked together, and how a more holistic approach of healing can really put the patient in control of their condition. So that's number one. Number two, I'd like patients to also understand that there is this parable. And actually, for a patient to really grab a hold of this concept and forgive their doctors who don't know that much about their condition is one of the things that I think will transition the healing that we see in long COVID in a much more aggressive way, because I'm often seeing patients who have just gone round and round and round in seeing that ologist, i.e. one of the blind men, to another ologist, to another ologist. And all we can see as ologists, including me, I can only see the heart, right? If I'm asked a specific question about palpitations. But if I open my mouth, or the patient said to me, actually, my gut is slightly disturbed. Actually, I have temperature dysregulation. Actually, I've got brain fog. I've got some other stuff going on with me. We can link it up into a more upstream important factor that is driving the whole constellation of symptoms. And sometimes the treatment needs to be driven upstream. And that upstream treatment need not be delivered by a physician, which is my point, which is why some of these phenomenally successful programs are like yoga in long COVID. So Susie Bolt's program is, one that a lot of my patients have been to and said they've recovered very well from it. And it provides a very nice, safe, nurturing platform. But also the kind of singing programs and the community programs all across the world, they provide that more regular input to help patients to navigate so you're not on your own. It's like any practice, Jazz. If you were meditating and you came and watched this webinar and you were doing the kind of cycles with us, and then you said, wow, I've had the treatment. I felt coherent during this meditation. But then you only did it once, or only did it once every month. It's not enough. So this needs to be a daily practice. And just like diets, when you lose that impetus of the first, 6 weeks of the first consultation, and time steps away from you, you forget that the way to enhance your vagus is daily, dedicated, routine, regular practice. And this is the other thing, the other piece of research to unlock would be how to allow patients to feel empowered to take this practice into their own hands. Maybe it's with a bigger group of non-physicians who have the kindness and the time to share this aspect of healing with patients, anchored, of course, by kind of protocols to diagnose something that needs diagnosis and treated. So that, I guess, is where I would put my money into, rather than looking at the molecular biology of antithrombin 3. Or some other immune-mediated molecule with one specific treatment.
Yeah, I very much agree. Boon, thank you so much for your time. This has been absolutely outstanding, insightful on so many different levels.
Another absolutely fascinating discussion, in my opinion, and I hope you found it useful. If you're in any doubt about the efficacy and importance of breathwork, I hope those doubts have been suitably dispelled. Look after yourselves. Until next time.